Across the black sky galloped the wild hunt, a procession of fiery-eyed phantoms on skeleton horses, their tattered cloaks and standards fluttering behind them. They bring death. They are death itself. The faces of those in the front are covered by skull helmets, their armor by bulging ribs. Their weapons are fear, frost, and a whiff of the afterlife. They are the generals of the wild hunt. High-ranking elves of the Ainel people, horrible ghosts that abduct people in the night, dark, bloodthirsty spirits from another world. The generals of the wild hunt. There are only a few of them, and you can recognize them at first sight. They are surrounded by a centuries-old aura of death. Who are they? What is their life story? What do they kill in the name of? What are their goals? What do they roam the continent for? Why do they need Princess Cirilla of Cintra and the life of the Witcher Geralt of Rivia? What drives them? What was their life like? Let's get to the bottom of it all. But before we start this video, we would like to thank our first patron and encourage you guys to join in the support on Patreon or right here on YouTube. In return, we promise even more content, as well as the opportunity to participate in choosing topics for future videos and lots of fun activities. For now, get your snacks, and the old Witcher will tell you about the great and terrible generals of the Wild Hunt. Auberon Mirak. We begin our story with the first leader of the Ainel, one whose name was once feared to be spoken among the peoples of many worlds, Auberon Mirak, or King of the Alders. In those distant times when this legendary leader was still young, that is thousands of years ago, a single nation of elves ruled over several planets. This people bore the name of Ainundad. One of the settlements of Ainundad was located on the continent. It was here that Auberon was born. In his younger years, he was impatient and ambitious. He often mocked the elders of Ainundad, who wished the elven people peace and stability. His words reached the ears of young and ambitious elves like himself. As a result, many of them got obsessed with Auberon and rallied around him, calling him their leader. And so a great split occurred among the elves. Those who followed Auberon called themselves Ainel, the people of the Alders. Those who remained on the continent took the name Ainshade, the people of the mountains. As for the name of the great ancient race of Ainundad, only memories remained. Well, it did happen thousands of years ago. Elves in those days had access to the Ard Gate, a huge stable gate that allowed them to travel between worlds. All worlds were on the legendary Great Spiral, and the gate gave access to this very spiral, effectively opening the way to any of those worlds. The gates were controlled by a race of unicorns who could sense space and time better than any other creature in the universe and kept the balance intact on the spiral. The unicorns had been friends of the people of Ainundad for many millennia, and therefore allowed the elves to use the Great Gate of Ard Gate. Thus, the Ainel elves, led by Auberon, left the continent and arrived in another world, the real name of which has been erased from history. They got there on white ships, but they carried Black Death with them. The new world was the home of unicorns and humans. The former still thought the elves were their allies. The latter didn't even realize what was happening. The people of Alders, however, very quickly dispelled the illusions of humans on their account. Under the leadership of Auberon, the elves launched a war against the humans. Since the Ainel were superior in development and magic, they quickly defeated their opponents' weak armies. Most of the humans were killed. The rest were turned into slaves. It was only then that the unicorns intervened. Thus began the Great War between the two great races. Many worlds were affected by this war, and incredibly cruel it was, but the armies of Ainel and the unicorns were equal. No one could strike a decisive blow, and both sides suffered significant losses, except that the unicorns did not retreat and drew their power directly from the spiral. But the elves gradually got tired of the war. Their ranks were thinning, and some generals began to whisper unhappily behind Auberon's back. The young king realized that he had to act. Gathering the best elven experts, he was able to cast the spell called garan, the Great Barrier spell. This magical barrier surrounded the world the elves had conquered with an insurmountable barrier for their enemies. No one except those who knew the secret of the Great Barrier could now enter the land of the elves, and no one could leave it without the knowledge Auberon possessed. Even the unicorns capitulated to the Great Barrier. The Ainel elves' new home was officially conquered and appropriated by them, and the unicorns got completely discarded. With this spell, the elves wanted to take a break, heal their wounds, and move their armies to new worlds. But now something has changed. Some say that the magic of the Great Barrier was so powerful that the spheres of the worlds between shifted, and the spiral of the universe changed its shape. Others say that the event of the conjunction of the spheres was triggered by unicorns. There are even those that nod in the direction of unsolved mysteries and higher powers that no one knows about. But only one thing is certain. Around that time, the event of the conjunction of the spheres took place. All magical portals and gates ceased to function properly. The worlds themselves came together in a marvelous dance, from which they came out completely different. Turns out there was one big problem in this Ainel victory. The elves led by Auberon have lost access to the Great Gate of Ardgaith and the ability to travel between worlds, remaining prisoners of the conquered planet. Moreover, their world began to suffer from the White Frost. A way of escape had to be found, and so their great plans of conquest came to an abrupt end. Hundreds of years passed. In time, the Ainel calmed down and made a truce with the unicorns, but the latter were no longer willing to share the secrets of traveling between worlds, and the elves themselves could not find the source of this power. In a desperate attempt to reach the Great Spiral, they were forced to develop the Elder Blood Project, a genetic experiment that will bring together certain elven males and females, so that at some point, hundreds or thousands of years after several generations of Ainel, a child would be born who would possess the power needed to open the great gates of the worlds. And while these hundreds and thousands of years lasted, the elves began to look for some cracks in the fabric of time and space. They were not satisfied with their boring world. In the course of long research, the best of the magicians of the Ainel people, who are called the Sages, found a way to move at least the projections of their soldiers to other worlds. And King Auberon Mirak decided to make the most of this chance. He created a special military unit. He called it the Dierg Ruadri, the Red Riders. The best veterans of battles with unicorns and humans joined the ranks of this army, legendary mighty warriors of the older people. Each was given a thoroughbred stallion and a fine forged chain mail. Each got equipped with horrible human skulls and ribs stylized armor, as well as monstrous weapons. A blood-red cloak adorned each one's back. And when the Red Riders were finally assembled, Auberon first appointed as commander the amazing Winter Queen, an elf who was said to have lost her original nature to the White Frost. After the Winter Queen, Auberon appointed his most trusted general as commander of the Red Riders, a veteran of many battles and an elf who had killed many unicorns. He was called Sparrowhawk, a bird of prey that knows no pity and carries death. He became the leader of the newly formed army. This army will travel between worlds, not in its full strength, not in its entirety, and for short periods of time, but it will nevertheless enter new worlds and kidnap people from there in order to increase the number of slaves. And everywhere it will bear an eloquent and blood-curdling name. The army of the Red Riders will be called the Wild Hunt. Auberon himself will remain in power, but as time passes, the fire in his heart and eyes would fade. The purpose for which he once led the Ainel elves away from the rest of the Ain Unda people will remain somewhere far. The Elder Blood experiment will get messed up when one of its participants, named Lara Doran, suddenly opposes the will of her people. But that is a whole different story. We'll tell you about it in the future, but now let's get back to the leaders of the Wild Hunt. For the King of the Alders, Auberon Mirak, will eventually lose his zest for life, and he will not be able to lead his people out of the captivity of the conquered world. He will die in his palace, and he will be replaced by that very same trusted general of the Wild Hunt, the one with the fire still burning in his eyes. Eredin. Eredin Briac Gloss. He bears the nickname Sparrowhawk, given to him by the unicorns. At the head of the army of ghost riders of the people of Ainel stands this one, a terrible, ruthless warrior, a clever strategist, and a veteran of hundreds of great battles. Incredibly tall, powerful, black-haired, with a cold, penetrating gaze and sharp facial features, armed with a curved sword with a single-sided blade, dressed in fearsome armor, with a crown-shaped helmet and a skull-shaped mask. Death's rider on Death's steed, king of the wild hunt. Eredin was defined by his cruelty and plans to elevate the elven race. Himself, like all other elves, originally had access to Argaith, traveling to other worlds, and even before the war with unicorns, probably bringing subjugated humans from those campaigns as slaves to serve his people. Legends were told of ruthless horsemen from other worlds, and of the Winter Queen, who moved around with this army and wounded the hearts of men with ice shards, because of which men lost all joy in life. All this gave Briac Glass pleasure, but in a moment, Eredin seized his reins. For among the Ainundad arose the persona of Auberon Mirak. Eredin then realized that he had to follow this leader and joined his quest to other worlds, becoming one of the most celebrated warriors of the Ainel army in battles with humans and unicorns, and earning his famous nickname Sparrowhawk from the latter. The people of Alders then exalted Eredin, and when the war ended and access to the Great Gate of the Worlds was lost, it was their best soldier that Auberon chose to lead the Wild Hunt army after the Winter Queen. And it was in this quest that Sparrowhawk found himself. He sought out the most talented and mighty warriors among the Ainel, replenishing the ranks of his army with the best ones. Over time, seeing the universal adoration of the other elves, Eredin began to trust King Auberon less and less. The Sparrowhawk saw that he no longer burned with the ideas and goals of uplifting the people of Ainel, and Eredin himself was still the same. He would not give up his priorities for anything. He gradually began to hatch a plan to overthrow the ruler of Ainel. The ambition of the king of the Wild Hunt grew to that of the leader of the entire Ainel people. The last straw in the cup of Eredin's patience was Cirilla, a human girl and child of the elder blood. She ended up in the world of Ainel, and all Auberon had to do for the good of his people was to make her bear his child. But even that, the ruler could not do. Eredin realized he had to act. He couldn't kill the king himself, so he probably poisoned him. The king is dead. Long live the king. It was Briac Glass who remained the only claimant to the throne of Ainel, king of the Ainel and king of the Wild Hunt at the same time. As a ruler, he did not give up his duties in the Ghost Rider army. Eredin had a great goal: to open the gates between the worlds and thus write his name in history again, and also to save his people and himself. The threat of the White Frost loomed ever larger over the world of Ainel, so Eredin decided to return to the mainland, the world that the elves had once left under the leadership of Auberon, a world where the people of Ainundad once lived, a world where humans now ruled, that world where the brotherly people of Ain Shade struggled to survive and desperately needed help. All he had to do was find a way to reopen the Great Gate. That probably sounded like nothing. Then Eredin wouldn't have to gallop through the crazy timelessness and the crackling cold. Then the elves of Ainel would subjugate the continent and move there from the dying world. If ever their domination does come, the people will still pine for the kings they call tyrants today. So far, Eredin had only one problem, but it was the problem: the gates of the worlds, the problem of centuries and millennia. But at the same time, he had a plan to solve it: the Elder Blood. When he became king, shortly before that is, Ciri had escaped from the world of Ainel, the child of the Elder Blood, the key to solving that very great problem. She will not get too far, Eredin thought. I'll get her sooner or later. But Ciri kept running and running, and he kept following, failing to catch up though. And in the end, the king of the Wild Hunt spent too much energy trying to catch this little girl. He chased her across worlds and time. He caught up with her only in Kaer Morhen, the witch's fortress on the continent. But even there, he could not get her. For she was the child of a genetic experiment, a child that had been bred for generations. Her power was unimaginable, Because of his pride, he underestimated her, and when Ciri unleashed that power, Briac Glass had no choice but to try to survive. He did survive, but found his death soon enough. In another attempt to find and get Ciri, in another attempt to get the key to the gates of the worlds, Eredin came to battle with a witcher named Geralt of Rivia, the one who protected Ciri and called himself her father. A white wolf in a battle with a sparrowhawk. This man, not even a man, a mutant, he defeated Eredin in battle. He killed the king of the wild hunts, the king of the alders, who even in the last moments of his life raved about white frost, elder blood, and traveling between worlds. The Witcher Geralt of Rivia ended the great and terrible life of the great and terrible elf. By the way, what did you guys think of the battle? It didn't disappoint you guys, did it? Write about it in the comments. Caranthir. Well, Eredin was not alone in his deeds. He was surrounded by loyal companions and affiliates. Some of them stood out. Eredin elevated them and set them above the rest. They became the leaders of the Wild Hunt. It is time to talk about one of the most interesting characters of the Red Vitus army, a powerful sorcerer, a warlock, who is also the navigator of the entire Ainel army, Caranthir Arfaniel. The fate of this character was very interesting because he began his journey as a pupil of the notorious sage named Avallac'h. In the course of long lessons, the mentor discovered in Caranthir a unique gift for ancient magic. He could navigate the cold, icy void between worlds and could find his way to any of the worlds. Of course, Caranthir was not a child of the Elder Blood, and he was not able to open the large stable gates between the worlds. But for the Wild Hunt, a stable gateway between worlds remained just a dream for the time being, so even what Caranthir could do was already considered an invaluable talent. The Ghost Riders needed a navigator, someone who could guide a group of Ainel soldiers to the world they needed, and Caranthir was perfect for the role. It is worth noting that Caranthir's talent did not arise by chance and out of nowhere. The elves, being obsessed with genetic experiments for a long time, brought together elven males and females, and only after several generations of such non-random connections was Caranthir born. In all this process, of course, a sage named Avallac'h was involved, and when Caranthir was born, Avallac'h simply could not leave this special child to its own fate. The sage took the gifted child as his apprentice. He had high hopes for the unique talents of the young Ainel magician, and his expectations were justified, but he still miscalculated with the character of the unruly Caranthir. Avallac'h's apprentice was able to develop his talent, as well as supplement it with other skills. There was no one among the people of Ainel who used ordinary battle teleportation better than Caranthir. Spells that commanded frost, summoning elementals, battle magic. All these he had also learned to use incredibly skillfully. Stories of Avallac'h's brilliant apprentice quickly spread among the elves. It was simply impossible to keep such a talent a secret, and very soon Caranthir attracted the attention of many people interested in his services. The king of the Wild Hunt, Eredin Briac Glass, paid special attention to him. He spoke extensively with a talented student of Avallac'h, aligned him in his worldview, and inspired him with great goals for the salvation of the people of Ainel. Thus, as time went on, Caranthir drifted away from his first mentor. At one point, he decided to leave Avallac'h and associated his life with the Wild Hunt. He passed the trials and ordeals and joined this army, later becoming one of Eredin's most trusted companions. From that day on, he no longer used his knowledge to bring good ideas to life. His sorcery was now more often than not aimed at violence. Caranthir hardened himself and became the perfect soldier, not one to ask questions, but in all things favorable to the Wild Hunt King's plans. The best navigator he had, he also learned close-quarters combat quickly, skillfully using his staff to defeat even the strongest swordsmen. Combined with his masterful use of teleportation magic, this skill made him a powerful warrior. He had killed many innocents in his life. He used his magic to pave the way for Ainel's deadly army. At the Battle of Kaer Morhen, his spell froze and immobilized almost all the defenders of the fortress. In the same battle, it was Caranthir who saved the life of his king, Eredin, when he was nearly destroyed by the power of the Child of Destiny. But one day himself, in search of a child of the Elder Blood, led the Wild Hunt ship Naglfar straight to Andvik. There, his journey ended. Caranthir's uncompromising and brutal nature was on full display in the last moments of his life. Even when the Witcher Geralt of Rivia defeated the elf in a duel and severely wounded him in the chest, he did not give up. He grabbed the White Wolf and teleported with him to the sea bottom, trying to take his enemy's life along with his own. Even at the last moment, Caranthir's sole purpose remained the service of the Wild Hunt and its king, Eredin, and any price in this matter was appropriate for him. Imlerith. The second general of the Wild Hunt army bore the name of Imlerith and was essentially the exact opposite of Caranthir. Even in the old days, he had stood out from the entire Ainel army. He participated in many bloody battles when the elves were still strong and were able to create gates between worlds. Always Imlerith was in the front ranks of the Ainel troops and always distinguished on the battlefield by special cruelty and ferocity. But then came the cataclysm of the conjunction, or the conjunction of the spheres, and the elves lost the ability not only to fight with other peoples from other worlds, they lost the ability even to travel normally between these very worlds. Now, only special, gifted spellcasters who bore the title of navigators could dispatch a small squad of Ainel troops in some of the worlds, and not for long. The wars somehow suddenly stopped, and Imlerith was eager for new battles as he only knew how to fight. The elves had settled in one world, making a shaky truce with the unicorns and completely enslaving the original inhabitants of that world, the humans. And the only place that could now suit Imlerith was the ranks of the Wild Hunts. All Imlerith relied on in his life was brute force. It was combat that he considered the most worthy pastime. Among the warriors of Ainel, there were only a few who could match him in a fair fight. One of them was Eredin Briag-Glass, the commander-in-chief of the Wild Hunt army. He impressed Imlerith with his skill, and his words fully corresponded to the thoughts of the Grey Warrior. Imlerith and Eredin very soon became associates. At first, the mighty soldier took the place of the right hand of the commander-in-chief, and when Briag-Glass ascended to the throne of Ainel, it was his loyal follower who he appointed as one of the most important generals of the Wild Hunt. Tall, much taller than humans, even his kin. Powerful and skilled warrior, Imlerith inspired fear in his enemies. His body had become virtually invulnerable to minor wounds over the millennia, and his pain threshold is the envy of many, even witchers. He is so strong that he can break a human neck with the slightest movement of one hand. His appearance is truly terrifying, for unlike his handsome counterparts, Imlerith is shaved bald, and his face is always adorned with battle paint. His armor is impressive, and conventional weapons can virtually do nothing to it. It is styled like a human skeleton, with ribs on the kairos and small skulls on the steel plates of the rest of the armor. In one hand, he holds the mace the size of a man, in the other, a huge 1.5-meter shield. Imlerith is a huge killing machine, which can be dealt with only if the machine itself fails, makes a mistake, like letting a fast and nimble opponent get dangerously close. Imlerith respects only power and those who can control it, and only those who are able to impress him with their skills in battle. The rest he either uses for his own purposes, like the crones of the Crookback Bog, or kills. He is vain and self-confident, and enjoys carnal pleasures. He likes alcohol and the company of a dozen or so succubi or human women. There are no words like pity or weakness in his mind, only cold calculation, stubbornness, and self-confidence. He is accustomed to killing defeated opponents. For example, during the siege of Kaer Morhen, it was Imlerith who first broke the bars of the castle's outer gates with his monstrous mace, and then broke the neck of the defeated witcher named Vesemir. Even in the last moments of his life, Imlerith did not change his nature for a second. Even after the generals of the Wild Hunt barely escaped Kaer Morhen, he still did not give up his amusements. The Witcher Geralt of Rivia found him alone, surrounded by succubi. Imlerith had accepted an invitation to a Covenant Bald Mountain made by the crones of the Crookback Bog. Clearly, a one-on-one battle was much easier than the likely battle against a whole squad of Ainel soldiers that would have surrounded Imlerith had he not been so careless. Still, the strongest one of the Wild Hunt warriors was no easy opponent. He had come out of hundreds of battles with glory, fallen to the blade of the White Wolf. Geralt of Rivia was much faster than his opponent, being able to disarm him, burn in his face with the fire of the Witcher's Igni sign, and then crush the skull of the great Ainel warrior with his own famous mace. Gails. The last one of the Wild Hunt generals goes by the name of Gails, one about whom less is known than about the others, and he is very different from all those we have told about before. For unlike Eredin, Caranthir and Imlerith, Gails was most concerned not with new conquests and millennial experiments, but with how the people of Ainel lived. He spent his entire life at the side of King Auberon. He was his advisor in making the most important decision. He served the ruler faithfully, even when he had grown old and discouraged. Gails understood everything and took care of the capital city of Ainel, the city of Tirnalia, by himself. When Auberon died, Gails, not knowing who had killed the king, swore allegiance to Eredin. He almost never traveled with the new leader of the Wild Hunt army, but he quickly became one of his closest, the general of his reserve older armies. He was also the regent of Tirnalia when Eredin was absent, that is, most of the time. He was loyal to Eredin. Loyalty was the essence of this elf, but at one point he learned that it was Briac Glass who had killed King Auberon. This information discouraged Gails and caused him to reconsider his views. When in his last battle, Eredin asked for the support of the troops from Tirnalia, Gails betrayed him and refused him, remaining in the elven world. Yes, loyalty is Gails' middle name, and in fact, he remained loyal to the end. He remained loyal to King Auberon. Even now, after the death of the leaders of the Wild Hunt, it seems it is Gails who rules the people of Ainel. There is no one else. That is not known for certain, but it's a safe conclusion to draw. Where will he lead his people? What goals will he set for himself? And what path for Ainel will he choose? Well, only time will tell. This story hasn't been written yet. That's all for today. Put a like if you enjoyed this video and subscribe to our channel. Click the bell to not miss any videos on the Witcher universe. Geralt of Rivia himself destroyed almost all the generals of the Wild Hunt. Who could take their place? What do you guys think? Write about it in the comments. We'd appreciate it if you supported our work on Patreon or with a sponsor subscription right here on YouTube. This way, you will be able to participate in the creation of future videos, choose topics for them, and get other interesting bonuses. But in the meantime, thank you all for watching and see you soon when the Your Witcher speaks once more.